Hello and welcome to the Meaning Project Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel A. Franz. And as always, once again, 151 times, thank you for this opportunity to bring a little bit of mental health and meaning to your day. And not just mental health and meaning today. I think today I'd also like to bring some culture, maybe even some poetry. That's right, a poem. Poems, art, can be quite meaningful in the experience. But this particular poem is pretty meaningful for me specifically. Today we're going to talk about the field of logotherapy, psychology of decision-making, but also some poetry. That's right. I'm going to try to tie all of these ideas together in a helpful and meaningful way. So this particular poem, as I said, is about decision-making. Probably one of my favorite poems, not because of its psychological basis or its archetypal nature. No, probably because I came across this poem in 7th grade, Mr. Terpstra's honors English class. Now, I was already failing Mr. Terpstra's honors English class after he had us read Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven and then asked us for our interpretation. Now, as a 7th grader interpreting Edgar Allan Poe, I turned to my favorite resource in poetry, my father, who had no experience and no knowledge of poetry whatsoever. But being a 7th grader of a certain age, I thought, this man surely will interpret Edgar Allan Poe in a much more A or B grade level than I will. So I allowed my father to help me with the interpretation. I proudly brought it to Mr. Terpstra's honors English 7th grade class and handed it in and failed miserably. And the thing about Mr. Terpstra's 7th grade honors English class is when you failed, he let you know. Mr. Terpstra, when I was in 7th grade, and probably in reality, was a large man with a booming voice and a great big furry beard. And he usually called people by their last name in class. Now, I credit with Mr. Terpstra as being one of the first people to push me into the field of psychology because of the nature of his class. It was somewhat abusive. Mr. Terpstra, God rest his soul, he passed years ago, had a foam brick for students who may not be paying attention or falling asleep in class. And he would whiz that foam brick at your sleeping head quite proficiently. But even more proficient was Mr. Terpstra's fickle finger of fate. It was a crocheted glove with a face on it, a face on the pointer finger. If I remember correctly, it was a purple crocheted glove with a face on the pointer finger that he kept on one of those old 1980s teacher's pointer sticks. It was about half a pool cue. So if you could imagine, resting on the chalkboard, we still had chalkboards back then, Mr. Terpstra's fickle finger of fate would come flying at you when you made a mistake. He would grab that pool cue of a pointer and fling it with immense accuracy. And that fickle finger of fate would come flying at somebody's forehead at tremendous amounts of speed. That's how I was introduced to poetry and diagramming sentences. And you wonder why I became a psychologist. I think it's all right there. But Mr. Terpstra's 7th grade honors English class also introduced me to one of my favorite poems. Mr. Terpstra was big into Robert Frost. And look, I don't claim ownership of Robert Frost in this poem. Most people know it. Most people have read it or heard it. And if you get online and look at the interpretations of it, apparently most of us have read it and interpreted it poorly because the poetry nerds out there really seem to have some profound arguments about this particular poem. For me, it's about decision-making. It's about discernment. And lately, I'm being faced with some interesting decisions, some fun decisions, I think. possibly some life-changing decisions. And in all honesty, it's damn terrifying. It's not that bad. I mean, these are good things. I don't want to, make it seem like I'm, have to decide to lose my house or my car or which kidney I might give up. But these are some interesting choices. So last night I turned to my favorite poem from Robert Frost. And ironically, I found this. I knew I had this in the basement for you watching on YouTube. Check this out. This old wooden frame with a, laser jet printed copy of Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. And I looked on the back of it. This is kind of sweet. Might give you a chuckle. It says, "To Dan with lots of love, Michelle S. XOXOXO. A lot of XOs. Back in the Christmas of 1997, I guess I was worth a lot of X and O's. 1997, my then girlfriend, Michelle S., who is now my wife, Michelle F., printed this out and gave it to me because even back then she knew it was my favorite poem. And as you can see here on the YouTube, there's a dollar bill tucked in the frame. And if I remember correctly, the road not taken for me at one point was to go into private practice instead of clinical management. And I think in my mind, that's the first dollar bill I earned in private practice. So let's talk a little bit about the road not taken and meaningful decision-making. Excuse me, with B not here, it's hard to hit the mute button and take a slurp of coffee. So I apologize if you heard that. But onward to meaningful decision-making. And the road not taken, a poem many people often misname as the road less traveled. Let's talk a little bit about it. The road not taken. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both. And be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down, one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. You can hear in that the idea that taking the road less popular, maybe we should say, is what Robert Frost is suggesting. That it is heroic to do something other people aren't doing. And that's the common interpretation. But I'm sorry, I can't think of the real name. We're just going to call them poetry nerds. Because I'm a logotherapy nerd, we can call them poetry nerds. The poetry nerds have a different perspective on it. They say that this poem is more about that archetypal longing we all feel later in life for decisions not made, for potentials not realized, as Dr. Frankl will tell us. That if you read deeply, how does he say it? Though, as for that, the passing there, the worn had really... both paths had been worn really about the same. So Frost tells us he took the one less traveled, but they were really about the same. So was it a heroic decision? And then in reading about the interpretations of this poem, we also have to go to the title. Again, I mentioned intentionally, this is often misnomered as the road less traveled or the path less traveled. But no, the title is The Road Not Taken, the decision not made. And in that last paragraph, he goes on to talk to us about lamenting. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. That last line can be haunting. What does that mean? That has made all the difference. Was it a good difference? Was it a bad difference? Tell me, Robert Frost, what decision do I have to make? We can romanticize the poem and talk about the heroic nature of doing things other people don't do. Or we can look at it as a lament, ages and ages hence, lamenting, being sad, feeling guilty about the decision I didn't make. But in the end, we still have to make decisions. And sometimes that's hard. In a world full of daily decisions, I say this to you often, in a world full of daily decisions, we can actually find decision paralysis. Too many decisions. Steve Jobs is famous for telling people why he always wore every day the same thing, a pair of jeans and a black turtleneck, right? Because he didn't want to have to tax his brain with trying to figure out what to wear. We all face those kinds of decision difficulties in life, those overwhelm of decisions, a wealth of decisions. And so how do we go about making the right decision? And today, I think this is for you just as much as it is for me to go through this and remind myself that someday I may look back and consider the road not taken. And can I do that? Will I be able to do that in a decade or two? Will I be able to do that without regret? That's one way to make a decision. What's going to lead me to the least amount of regret? It's kind of a negative way to look at it, but there are other ways too. We could consider Dr. Frankl's meaning of the moment, that every decision allows us an opportunity to decide meaningfully. What decision might give us the most meaning in life? What decision might provide the most creativity, the greatest experience, or an opportunity to choose our attitudes? Sometimes we can pile those ideas up I was just talking about this in the office the other day. It was funny. It was another therapist I was working with, and we were talking about the old pros and cons list, right? Those things that cognitive behavioral therapy tells us to make. If you have a decision to make, just, line up all the positives and negatives, and whichever one evens out, that's the one you should decide. That's such, excuse me, cognitive behavioral therapist. I'm sorry. I don't mean to frown on your Wheaties, but that's just such garbage. That never works, right? Because we make that list and we're like, I may have 10 positives and 5 negatives, but I'm still not going to do it. It can be helpful. It can be an exercise in allowing you to bring in the most data. But that's another idea, right? Sometimes in decision overwhelm, we can bring in so much information. And don't tell her I said this, but my wife is notorious for this. I need to work on this myself, because every time she brings up we have a decision to make, a car to buy, or even not even a car, a grill, or cooking utensils. That was sexist. Sorry. Whatever it might be. She's like, well, the reviews online say, or the reviews on Amazon. And I've gotten to a point in life, I'm like, I don't give a damn about the reviews on Amazon. I don't care about 20 other people's opinions that I don't even know. Sometimes I don't care about the people's opinions that I do know, but I do ask them anyway. And when I do ask, I certainly do care. But sometimes we can bring in too much information to make a decision. And on the MBTI, right, for us J's out there, we enjoy making decisions. We look forward to making decisions. And one of the ways we make decisions is bringing in all the data and looking at what is unnecessary and extraneous and what is important and pertinent. But sometimes, and I recognize this, when feeling overwhelmed with a decision, I can bring in way too much data, ask far too many opinions. And sometimes just asking an opinion and talking about it as an extrovert on the MBTI is an opportunity for me to externally process and chat. I caught myself just doing that on the phone this morning with a good friend. You know him from the podcast, Chief Joe Paul. He and I were chatting, and I talked about these decisions I'm facing, and it was funny until it was embarrassing, because I realized I just kept talking over him, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Here I am externally processing, and you're trying to actually offer me feedback. So for us Jays to recognize that sometimes we can bring in too much data, we can look for too many opinions. but our strength is to disseminate what is not good information and put it away. But that may contribute to overwhelm, too much data, too many advisors, too much input. Now, for those of you who are more tending towards perceiving on the MBTI, you might be the opposite. Sometimes we recognize those individuals often don't like making decisions. That making a decision, I've heard it called, it can be suffocating. And therefore, maybe you don't, right? And when we don't make a decision, guess what? Life's going to decide for you. If you don't logically, rationally, maybe even emotionally, make a decision, you put it in the hands of fate, of the universe, of God, of whatever, and life will decide. So there's a balance to be had there. It is interesting. I've noticed in my research with the MBTI, I found there's a lot of theories that we, in the areas where we may be extreme in our personality preferences, as we age, we tend to move more towards the middle. And I've caught that in myself many times, whereas earlier in life, hard decision. I would take in all the data and this is the best decision ever. And now I tend to move more towards, a little bit of fate's okay. A little bit of, let's give it a try and see what happens, can work out. So being aware of your MBTI can certainly be helpful when it comes to these big decisions, or any decision in life, so that you know yourself and can look at how you go about decision making. So we have the J and P for MBTI, recognizing if you're an external processor when you're asking people for guidance or advice. But also, as I mentioned, Dr. Frankl's meaning of the moment, where he also talks about when we make decisions, when we go through life, we have the opportunity to realize potentialities. He talks about, the reason, the tragic triad, pain, guilt, and death. Well, what do we do about death? We recognize that because life is brief, because life is transitory, we are called to act in life, to take action. And sometimes that means making decisions and realizing our potential. And when we do that, those potentialities, those decisions, as he says so poetically, so lovely, are stored in the granaries of time. Each meaningful decision we make is stored in time. And it goes on, even after we don't, to have an impact in some way or another. We can get all metaphysical on that, but some of the things I'm reading in my new course of studies definitely goes towards metaphysical and consciousness and soul and spirit. We'll talk about that more later in another podcast. But realizing our potential, realizing our potentials, right? To pay attention to what decision, what opportunity might give me the best opportunity to realize a new potential. And even as we go into middle age or older age, we still have potentialities to realize. We often think that realizing potentials is something of youth, but even at this time in life, right? Even later in life, there are still decisions to be made and potentialities to be realized. So we have the meaning of the moment. We have realizing potentialities. We have our J and P, our judging and perceiving differences on the MBTI. But then sometimes, as we talk about Frankl's existential, right? I love doing this thing. Here we are now. Here's where we want to be. And that in between, that existential tension of where we are going, embracing the liminal space, embracing the limbo, right? Most of us, I don't know many people who say, I love being in limbo of not knowing and not being able to make a decision, right? Or not even having the details to make a decision. Human beings are not wired to sit in that space for long. Maybe some of us a little bit more than others, but we are deciding beings. We are acting beings, right? We do appreciate the opportunity to take action. And sometimes the inability to take action feels suffocating, it feels maybe irresponsible or as though our freedoms are being tread on. But there are times that we need to sit in that liminal space. And in a rational sense, when we sit in that liminal space, we allow other forces to take action, right? We allow the mechanisms of whatever is going on behind the decision to be enacted, other people to act for us, act upon us, right? But in a much more spiritual sense, We are allowing the universe, we are allowing God, we are allowing our spirit to just go, to be, to see what happens. I think that's a very MBTI perceiving kind of thing. Sitting in that liminal space and just allowing ourselves, allowing the thoughts, the ideas to percolate, to marinate, to sit and rest. Sometimes when we sit in that liminal space of not knowing, our dreams, our daydreams, our waking dreams, our brain takes hold and can take action for us, can help give us new ideas, maybe can give us visions through our dreams. Sometimes we don't have to decide immediately. Sometimes it's okay to sit in that liminal space and wait. So when it comes to decision making, we have poems and poetry like Robert Frost. We have the meaning-centered decision making of Dr. Viktor Frankl and finding the meaning in the moment, looking at what choice optimizes experience or creativity or attitudinal values. We can look to realize our potentials. And of course, we can use hard science like the MBTI to understand our personalities. And that last letter of the MBTI is about decision making. Are you more into judging or perceiving? Are you an options thinker or are you a decision maker? That is an opportunity. You know, I love the MBTI. I'm happy to share that with you if you want to engage in it. We also have the opportunity not to decide. Again, if we wait too long in that liminal space, if we wait too long for outside forces to make decisions, the world will make a decision for you if you don't decide, and you may not always like it. And that's okay. It's okay not to decide. Just know a decision will be made for you. And sometimes being active in your life and active in your own decisions is much more efficacious, much more healthy, much more a symptom of positive wellness. And of course, one of my favorite ways to make decisions is simply having a beer with my buddy. Or for some of you out there, maybe it's a glass of wine with women. Or maybe coffee with a confidant. Sometimes just sitting back and enjoying time with other human beings can be the thing to do. I'm going to go do that today. Running Man, I'm coming down and we're going to hang out and we're going to have a beer or two and talk about these things. And for those of you out there who are confronted by hopefully good decisions, but maybe even difficult negative decisions, these are just a few of the ways you can go about that process. But I would encourage you, again, and maybe this is my bias, I would certainly encourage you to take initiative and go one of these, all of these ways in making that decision. As always, thank you for this opportunity to allow me to bring a little bit of mental health and meaning, and now culture and poetry, into your day. To find out more about what I'm up to, you can find me at danielafranz.com. You know it. It's DanielAFranz.com. To jump into your search for meaning with my good friend, Dr. Baruch Halevi and Dr. Elise Cortez, you can hop on over to the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy, where we're doing some pretty cool stuff with people interested in learning more about Dr. Frankl, not just learning more, but truly using his principles to make decisions, to find their path, to find their meaning in life. And you can find out more about that at themeaningacademy.com. Once again, it's always my pleasure to bring a little bit of mental health and meaning to your day. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. Take care.